On today's episode, we're talking about how agency leaders can use data to make better business decisions and improve profitability without overwhelming the agency with reporting. We'll focus on practical, experience-driven ways data has helped surface real patterns around clients, engagements, people, and growth.
All right, Luke. So today, we want to dive into the use of data in an agency. But first, maybe we should talk about why is it that data feels overwhelming for many agency leaders, and why is it that agency leaders resist diving into the data?
Depending on the agency leader, data, you can collect a lot of data, but the numbers and spreadsheets can sometimes feel overwhelming with the amount of inputs that you're dealing with, and oftentimes, in the day to day, you have a lot going on at the agency, and if things are going well, you can almost feel like a nice to have. It takes a backseat to everything that's going on in the business.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, just because people collect data, now they feel like they need to generate all kinds of reports,
Yep.
and and this too we've been guilty of was you generate whether it's weekly reports, you just kind of take the data and you think, okay, cool, like we have some kind of reporting going. Now we're somehow smarter, but it's actually not the case, right? And I think it leads to kind of this performative like analytics theater where you're like, oh, because we have data, we're smarter all of a sudden. But really, this is all about pattern recognition, and it's about how do you leverage the data to inform better decision making.
Yeah, I think, taking a step back, a lot of agencies already have the raw data that's needed. Oftentimes, people have access to financial data in something like QuickBooks, or a lot of agencies are doing time tracking. So they have data around how much time each team member is spending, on a weekly basis on each project, which project, what kind of tasks. A lot of the raw information is there. But, to what we are talking about before, it's like, how do you take all of those inputs, and then organize it in a way that you can actually review and reflect and, make some sense of all the numbers?
Yeah. Yes. And so to that point, today we're going to dive into, 5 practical lenses through which agencies can leverage data and, inform better decision making. So let's dive into the first one. You want to take this one?
Sure. The first one we're calling it engagement level analysis. So this is taking a look from a kind of project engagement level. So if you have projects, you have retainers, you have campaigns, however you organize the work that you're doing. Just taking a look at oftentimes it's profitability metrics. So even this is just understanding, what did you sell a project in for, and then what were your costs to deliver that project. So if you have those inputs, then you can take a step back and look at, were there some trends that we saw with, maybe the larger the project, the lower the profitability, or vice versa. Are there, certain types of retainers that, what you're selling in that consistently go over budget and you're always underwater on those? Are there certain areas of the work that you're doing that is more profitable or less profitable? Or, yeah, is there a combination? So it's like when you combine the two, they're less profitable. But if you do it separately, they're more profitable. And if there's any kind of insights like that, you can just glean from taking a step back and looking at everything holistically.
Yeah. So basically, analyzing these engagements, whether they're project retainers or whatever, can give you more insights into like, are you offering the right mix of services? Which services are likely to be more profitable and such, right? And so, and a lot of this can be easily gleaned from really good like time tracking data. But what happens to agencies that aren't into time tracking? Like, how can they go about getting the data necessary for some of these analysis?
There is some exercise of staffing. So when you staff people on a project, you can look back and kind of glean a signal on where people's time is going. So you might say this person is working 50% on this engagement or 100% on this engagement. And then you can kind of extrapolate at a high level, what your cost was over a period of time. And I think generally speaking, it'll get you like most of the way there, maybe like 80% of the way there. That directionally gives you the right information that you need.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to understand. Like, hey, if someone's burning 100% for like 20 weeks on a very low budget project, you're going to be over budget. So I think, yeah, like you can definitely glean stuff there. And so, just to kind of round this out, like I think a lot of this analysis at the engagement level really informs a few different things. And, I think pricing is definitely one of them. And the way you scope things is another. Yeah. What are some other things that can inform in terms of decision making?
Yeah, like I mentioned, if you can figure out some trend in services, like what services should you kind of double down on? What should you kind of step back from? And maybe it's not so black and white, but maybe there's a reworking necessary on how you're doing certain types of engagements or certain service lines, and then in some cases maybe you need to just stop doing a type of work in your agency.
Yeah, definitely. The second lens, which data can be helpful, is at the client level. So this is kind of taking a step up from the engagement and, kind of looking at the relationship with the client. And, with clients, obviously at the surface level, the revenue and, maybe contribution, the profit, contribution of that client is important, but then there's definitely more to this. And so, what are some other data points that agency leaders could review?
Yeah, I think with a long enough time horizon, you can see like what's your client tenure. So how long have they been with you, and with that, like what's the lifetime value of that client? So not just looking at one project or one engagement, but over several years. How much have they contributed? And then from that kind of broader look, at an annual basis, are they profitable? Can you see, maybe when you first started with them 3 years ago, you're, very profitable, but then over the years, you've had some margin compression, and then now you're working actually at a loss or, at a smaller margin with this client. So I think just looking on a longer time horizon to see if there's any good trends there.
Yeah, because if you have client relationships that last, more than a few years, it's always interesting to take a look at and glean insights because, sometimes depending on what your service offering is, there's definitely a shape to your engagements, right? So, let's say on the something like website design development, you typically have kind of this upfront big project where it's a redesign, migration, or whatever, and then it kind of tapers into a ongoing kind of maintenance, support and maintenance, maybe optimization type of work. But then you might have other relationships where you have multiple kind of spurts of campaigns. So you have like kind of some years you might have like a really big billing kind of peak, and then others it's kind of more chill, and so and between seasons too. So it's very interesting to kind of take a look and analyze it because then you get a sense of like, all right, like these are the types of clients that we have, and you can kind of dig even deeper into that.
Yeah, and actually on that point, it's interesting to think about. It doesn't have to be so linear. So let's say your business model is you might do an initial project and your margin might be lower, but you'll make up a lot of the margin later on. That could work, and I think it's just like understanding how that the shape of the margin is, and being intentional about potentially retention in that model, and how important that is to the business.
Yeah, and to
Yeah.
that point, retention. I mean, the client satisfaction is super important. So there's some signals there. I think if you're using different types of client survey feedback mechanisms, NPS, CSAT, or just even forms with questions on how you're performing. Those are data points too to understand. Okay, like are we doing a good job of servicing these clients, and what are areas that we can improve in, and also just more importantly, like what are the trends? Like where is our level of service as an agency?
Yeah. Yeah, and even thinking about there's so many different data points. Like when you look at a client relationship, you'll get some feedback from the team on how is it to work with this
Yeah.
client, with this company. Is there any friction that always happens? Is there a lot of pushback at every turn? And then from a finance standpoint, like their payment history, like sometimes if that's related, where like they're always holding their invoices and they're not paying on time. So it's always a challenge to chase down. You know different payments and invoices. So like these are aspects of a relationship that, it could be highly profitable, but if there's a lot of friction there, it may not be worth the struggle there.
Yeah, and if you layer on top of all this data that we just talked about, if you layer on kind of the client type, so this is the basic stuff about the client, like what industry or sector are they kind of in, how big are the clients, and just maybe even like what maturity level is their business. Are you working with a founder at a startup, or are you kind of dealing with kind of a scale up organization and, multiple stakeholders, maybe a director of marketing or a VP of, e-com or something like that. And then also like just what, what is the type of, kind of work you're doing with them? Maybe is it a strategic relationship where you're coming in to, do a lot of road mapping and high level thinking, consulting for them? Or is it more like execution level? Like, hey, we're here to like just fix a very specific problem and get it done fast. And so I think if you layer on that kind of categorization, across the client, then all of a sudden you can start to segment the clients more easily.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, there's so many data points around client engagement, right? We talked about the financial aspect, the relationship, et cetera. And it's almost focusing on the most, again, like what's the most impactful? Like how do you get 80% of the signal to determine what to focus on? And I think like client profitability is an important key one to look at. It's like what of all your clients, which ones drive the most profit, and how is that profit shaped? And then from a team perspective, like do they, and maybe it correlates in some cases, maybe it doesn't, but are there certain clients that like really take a lot of time or energy from the team to deliver that revenue? And it's almost, it's a balance of that, where there could be downstream impact of high profit, but high stress for the team may not be the best mix.
Yeah, and one thing you're talking about reminds me, like this is something when it comes to data, this is something that's common, the Pareto principle or 80-20 principle, right? Where like 20% of something, is probably responsible for 80% of the results. And so, this could be like, 20% of the clients may be responsible for 80% of the headaches. 20% of the clients might be responsible for 80% of profits. And, and 20% of the clients might be responsible for, 80% of the, most exciting work that you could showcase. So, it just shows up everywhere. And it's kind of, that's why segmentation is very important, because you can identify and surface this dynamic across your analysis, and just makes this kind of work that much more insightful.
Yeah. So so the goal of all of this, right? All of this data for clients, like what's the end result? I think really refining who you're targeting, what your ICP is, what type of client, if it's the industry size, the category, who the stakeholder is, like all of that helps you define who you're working with. And then from that, what are the behaviors that you can have internally to retain those clients and have long-term engagements with the people that you want, so that you can increase so it's not just a 20% delivering 80% of the profits, but trying to increase that percentage. And then for the team, it's thinking about how do you improve the experience for those clients? So what is it about your delivery, taking feedback from like all the NPS and any qualitative feedback from clients, and how do you improve your delivery? And then ultimately is you want to have that positive mix of clients that everyone is working with.
Yeah, sounds good. The third lens through which we're looking at this is the employee level analysis. So this is about looking more specifically at your team members, and what's the data around each employee, and what can you gather from there. And so and this is not to point out anyone for blame or anything like that, but it is to understand performance. Whether it's high performers or folks that are struggling to perform. Just to have data around that is going to sharpen your decision making. So what are some inputs that folks should consider?
One is kind of the most formal of performance reviews, where part of that we've done kind of peer reviews where your people that you've worked with provide feedback on their experience working with that person. And then even looking at the engagements that they were staffed on and seeing, were they profitable or not? The clients have a good experience working with that person? So just gathering more information about that person on, how they're working on the team.
And then, so, let's say we take these and whatever other inputs that we might get. I think some of the couple of patterns that you might want to look at in terms of like, yeah, how consistent are they on these engagements? Just on the negative side, are they continually like missing deadlines, or is there quality issues? On the flip side, like, somebody who's always hitting the deadlines, moving things forward, or like, just, that like, and I think over time, like this is where actually, you do get a sense from a gut, but then the data helps to kind of confirm or not, is like, hey, like if you staff certain people on certain projects, like, it's going to get done and done well. And so, those are positive signals. And if you have data to back that up, that's even better. And then, and so if you have folks that, for whatever reason, deadlines are always getting missed, projects are always running over in terms of budget, or like there's always some kind of issue that they're kind of, messing up on, like, the data really does help to understand, help you understand those things.
Yeah, and it's definitely a balance because, from a qualitative standpoint, people could really like working with somebody. So if you do peer reviews, it's always like, yeah, I really like this person. We're friends and we enjoy the experience, but you got to balance that with the numbers. It's like that can be true, but there could be delivery challenges where because of that or some other reason, projects always go over budget when like a certain combination of people work together. So it's not just like a popularity contest.
No, and this is
that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it is a fine balance, and you do have to be careful about it, and there's tough decisions to be made, but I think sports does provide a good analogy to all of this, because when you think about sports, there's a lot of statistics in terms of performance, tied to performance, and these days with different sports, there's advanced analytics, so you can kind of see, like, if someone's on the court or on the field, like you can see the plus minus impact of if when they're on the field or court playing for your team, the team's gonna do better, like they're expected to score more, or like perform better, or if they're on the bench, is it better or worse? And so it's like, and that player might be very popular with the team, but ultimately as a general manager or owner, like you have to make the tough call of like, well, do we want to win, or do we want to, have people be happy, kind of with friendly with their team members and keep them. And so it's very tough to make that call, but data does help make a stronger case.
Yeah, that's totally true. I'll move on to the next lens, which is new business analysis. So typically, when you kind of look at all of your kind of new business stats, it's you're looking at win rate. You might be tracking the number of leads that came in. But I think for here, there's a lot of depth that you go into, and a lot of teams do go into. So yeah, just taking a step back and looking at years of data around what types of prospects came in, whether that's by industry or role, or even taking a look at their budgets. So are you seeing any kind of trends by company size or industry and the budgets they bring in? Some other ones are like what services are they looking for from you, and that could be a signal on how they came in or what your reputation is in the industry. And speaking of that, like lead source. So, how did they find out about you? And what's the source of? Was it for marketing or other referrals, etc.?
I get really peeved when some of our agencies put website as the lead source, because I'm like, that's not a source. You got to think a little deeper. Usually, I mean, like people submitted their form on the website, but they heard about us somewhere else. So like, it's kind of like, it's usually, did they find us on search? We're what were the keywords that they were looking for, or like, if it was an AI, what was the prompt that they put in to get the result, which then led them to the website, which then led to the form submission. And then,
It's
and sometimes it's, yeah.
elastic attribution there.
Exactly, and then I mean, but then there's also like a lot of it is multi-touch, right? It's like, oh, like who else did you hear about us from? Sometimes there's partners that might have mentioned us, and they might have seen a LinkedIn post or something. And so I think it's important to capture all those things because lead source, you could go really deep, and like I said, it's a multi-touch journey a lot of times. And the sales cycle length is super important because face it, a lot of these engagements are months in the making, if not years. And so just understanding, okay, like when was the first time you talked to them, and there was something of interest, and then being able to track that and see these data points help you refine your ICP because there might be shifts over time. You might have started with smaller clients that you're talking generally to the founder or like a CMO, but then over time as you kind of move up market, you might be talking more with like a director of ecom or something like that, and just understanding what those trends are as well, and who gets looped in these decision making points. And then like there's also these days with these AI recording apps, you're bound to get a ton of data from calls. So call transcripts are really interesting ways to analyze and glean reasons for winning or losing deals. Because sometimes like you're going to get feedback from clients, and you're also going to get some things in between the lines that might be worth revisiting.
Yeah, the win loss analysis is one that's interesting. Just for both on both sides, just number one, asking, right, and getting that insight, and then and sometimes especially for losses, like they may not be as transparent about the reason why they selected another partner, but jumping on a call and taking that input and seeing if you can gather some bigger trends that you're seeing.
Yeah, yeah, and just real quick on that sales process thing, just a concrete example that comes to mind from some of our agencies is like finding out from some of the losses on like and it's instructive. Like you ask, sometimes clients are open to sharing, and I remember one of our agencies was curious why we lost the deal, right? Because we were kind of a finalist, and the presentation seemed to have gone well, and the client was very transparent in that, hey, like you guys were great, but during the process, we never got to meet the team that was going to work on the engagement. And and they said the other agency, the winning agency, was really good about kind of bringing those folks into the sales process, and we got to meet them, and so there was just a bit more confidence that there would be less of a bait and switch or kind of a dynamic going on there. And so that was a good signal because now that's a consideration for these engagement, these proposals or these kind of sales conversations, bringing team members into the mix.
Yeah, and I think from there it's understanding because every client, every prospect has kind of different. There's probably a list of these where different things that each person cares about. So part of the process is how do you glean any insights early on to say, all right, this client really cares about team process. Like let's get other faces involved in closing.
Yep. Okay. Let's do the last lens. So this is of course like we're doing five different lenses, but this is not like the exhaustive thing. There's so many other ways data could be used. I just want to make sure we call that out. But this last one we'll end with is about team, especially the team sentiment and capacity. So from a data perspective, it's making sure that you're using data to get a sense of that sentiment. And because like a lot of times you get some anecdotal things. And anecdotes are a type of data, but a lot of times you can get over anchored on like a couple of stories. So I'll give you a good example, right? Back in the day with when we were running Barrel, we had anonymous feedback, survey, right? Like I mean, anonymous feedback form. So
Yep.
anybody at the agency could just write whatever they wanted. We have no idea who it's coming from, and we thought, oh, this is a good way to kind of have a pulse on the agency. But every now and then, like, you get one of these forms that like form submissions where people go, on some pretty big rants about how things are terrible and wrong. And just, we didn't know any better, and we overreact to that, and we think, oh wow, like that is this is this is how everybody must be feeling. We have to fix things, and we kind of go kind of hardcore about that. And same with a few Glassdoor reviews as well. I think we kind of go over index on wow, like we just we're terrible. We need to do better or whatever. But over time, I think we realized, hey, we're just kind of giving too much weight to what are basically just one of many signals that we should be
it's like
kind of
one data
considering.
point.
Yeah, one data point, and I think that's where this idea of like, hey, more data if you want to make better decisions.
Yeah. So along the line of collecting more data from employees, we have used various employee engagement surveys. I think the latest was a survey system called Q12.
By Gallup, yep.
The Gallup survey, where it's a series of 12 exact questions that you have to ask in exact wording, and that covers things like one question is like, do you have a best friend at work? And it's strange to ask a question in that way, but it makes people really think about like, how do they define friend and how do they define best and all of that. And, like that might give you a signal about something, or, how, did you receive it's like receive positive feedback or in the past X amount of days, right?
Yeah.
Like it's all these in different areas around.
I think actually one of my favorite ones from that is like, do you have kind of the tools or resources to do your job well? I think, and I think that's really key, because I remember like we learned that, oh crap, like some of these people don't have access to certain kinds of, software or equipment to do their jobs.
It's like really actionable.
It's actionable stuff. So I think, those are all really good data points that you can action on.
Yeah. So it's a combination of that where it's very numerical and you can get have a score. But then, the commentary is really important, because if you just heard that, like, you don't know what the tool is and you don't know who said it, it's hard to take any action from that.
Yeah. So I think when we talk about like data for team sentiment, especially, even capacity, think about like how to plan for better. It is stuff like performance reviews, because you're going to get signals about like, hey, this is how I'm feeling about the types of work I'm getting assigned to. This is like how I feel about working with my team members. This is how I'm feeling about my workload. And so you're going to get a lot of that from these performance reviews, especially if you have a really great kind of system with your managers and your employees, and like how their the relationships are. You could get a pretty transparent view there. And lastly, like the resourcing data, right? So whether that's timesheets or just kind of whatever staffing plans you might have, like you can kind of see if certain folks are overloaded versus others, and a lot of this seeps in before you kind of need to look at the numbers, but it's good to have that quantitative data to back it up as well.
Yeah, I think all of that you can really kind of get a sense of like things like burnout risk. If there are any specific team members or departments that, if they are really overstaffed for a long period of time, or even from a flip side, like if you're understaffed and you kind of have a sense that there isn't enough work for me or my department, like is there like a risk that people start looking around for new opportunities? So using the data and the tools to help predict about what's going to happen with the team, but then also communication. Like if the team isn't clear about the vision of the company or why certain decisions were made or X, Y, Z, it could just be a gap in communication, leadership, kind of sharing, and getting everyone on the same page.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, and I think this is just to wrap this lens up. I mean, I think it is about better decision making on staffing plans, especially because so much of in an agency setting, so much of what drives like employee satisfaction, client satisfaction, just like team culture, is how well and how effectively you staff the right people on the right kinds of engagements. And so this is it's the more data you could have to make better decisions here, it's really, I think, one of the more high leverage decisions you can make. And then there's also like, what are your investment priorities, especially with your team? Like, do you need to, do you need to hire more? Do you need to, bring in other folks? Do you need to level up certain types of roles? But then beyond that, are there other kind of team bonding type activities? Do you think you should invest in more team get-togethers or retreats, or do you need to provide more professional development in the form of coaching or training, team-wide training of sorts? So like all those things can be more well informed through the data. And then how can you improve internal communication? Because at the end of the day, like you know the we know all too well, like the lack of communication. If there's a vacuum, people are gonna kind of project whatever the worst case, kind of views they might have about the business into that vacuum. So it's very important as leaders to be able to articulate, be proactive in communicating what's going on and where things are headed.
Definitely. We talked about these five lenses, and there's a lot of data, as you can see, that agencies do collect probably already, and may just sit there. But I would say there's some caveats that we should talk about around data. The first being overreacting or just reacting to different signals. So if there's a time horizon, so if you look back and you look at the data from the past month, but you realize, wow, like the past month was a very busy time for the agency where there are a lot of new projects that kicked off and there's a lot of uncertainty that may kind of skew how you're looking at data and how people are kind of reacting to scenarios. I think it's, you got to take a longer term view and see if there are any trends that you can look at. And yeah, and this is essentially the recency bias. So, like, are there things that just happen that skew your vision of, what the real kind of story is?
This is like the kind of the sky's falling type of dynamic of like you just have a rough few days or a week, let's say, and you could kind of convince yourself, hey, the sky's falling, like everything is going bad, like things are going up in flames. But really in that instance, you probably need to just take a few steps back and be like, okay,
Yeah,
you know what, this is kind of a few kind of challenges that we need to address, but it's not the end of the world, and there's definitely a lot of positive outweighing the negative as well.
definitely. And I guess the most important thing, kind of looking back, is you kind of need the data, right? So the consistency and building the habit of data collection over time is really important here. Just you could be really busy for a period of time, and you say, "Oh, we'll just skip that employee survey, or we'll skip that other thing," and suddenly you kind of lose. And when you look back on it a year later, you're like, "Oh wow, we really should have." We have a hole in our data set. So I think it's just like that consistency over time is important.
I'd be remiss because we're the Agency Habits podcast, so
Exactly.
make it a habit, just data consistency as well as data quality. Just make that a habit of making sure you collect that.
Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about kind of how people should think about collecting data?
Yeah, I mean, so we're talking tooling, maybe some of
Yeah,
the infrastructure. I mean, look, like we're we can probably spend a lot more time specifically on this, but I think you know, most simply, like a lot of this can just start in a spreadsheet, or just exporting it from different tools and then kind of stitching it together in a spreadsheet is a start. There's definitely tools out there, and SaaS products that you could buy or dashboards you could. I mean, and you could hire consultants too. There are people out there that might be fractional CFO, COO types that can come in and help support on a lot of this stuff if you're really strapped for time or you want that third party perspective. So a lot of that is out there. But like just going back to it, it's less about the tooling, and it's more about are you going to have are you going to make the time and have the discipline to do the reviews? Because that's where
yeah,
a lot of this comes in. And I'd say like sure with AI and stuff like there's you have less of an excuse now because like you could get richer analysis and stuff teed up for you to at least think about. You can synthesize huge amounts of data that in the past might have been tough. Like think about loading up dozens of sales call transcripts and getting some insights there, or just even analyzing various kind of project team meetings and getting stuff there. And like you can get a lot more value out of the data. So there's no excuse to not make the time to think about it and analyze it.
yeah. And I think on the AI note, you really have to apply your judgment on top of it, you can't just dump the data into AI and say, "Hey, what do you think? What's the trend here? What's the sentiment here?" And
Yeah.
really, they think about how you're prompting and suggesting and giving some background context on all of this. And yeah, it doesn't replace your judgment for how to take a look and analyze, assess, and um, decide how you're going to take action from all of the data and analysis.
Yep. I think agencies, that make data review a habit are the ones that are going to learn more lessons quickly and just be able to not make the same mistakes, avoid the same mistakes, the making those same mistakes. And so yeah, this is about like I said, embracing this as a habit and then letting it compound over time. All right. So with that, thanks for joining us. Till next time. See ya.
Thanks.